morning, open to the book of Genesis chapter 25. That's where we're going to start, and then we're going to end someplace else. And there'll be a lot of material that we cover in Genesis 25, and actually like 4 or 5 chapters we're going to get into this morning. You know, one of the things I've talked about a little bit, or made mention of as we've gone over these last couple of weeks, is the chaos that seems to be so prevalent in our world today. I don't know that in my lifetime there's ever been a more chaotic period in which I've been alive. Now again, I wasn't alive in the 60s, so I don't know what any of that was about. But I know that was a time of upheaval and unrest and chaos. And so as I've looked at the chaos that exists in our world, I'm kind of struck by what I see going on at really not just a national level or a state level or on a local level, but I see chaos that seems to be everywhere, in our homes and in our families and in our schools. And so there's chaos everywhere. And so what's born out of chaos, or actually what kind of feeds the idea of chaos, are a couple different things that I put in my notes as I've been looking at this the last couple of weeks. So my notes actually say chaos, crisis, and calamity. And so I think what comes, or what feeds the whole idea of chaos, the way we see it today, is that we go through personal crises in life that ultimately affect us. And if you think about everything that happens on a national level, at least when you turn on the news, a lot of that stuff goes down to the basic family unit. And so I would say then, if there is chaos or crisis at the most essential level of our lives, then that's going to play out in a bigger area. And ultimately what it goes back to is the crisis that exists within us because we don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And the biggest problem our country is facing today is that we have rejected what we know about Jesus and we've exchanged the truth of God for a lie. And so what we see going on ought to be expected because that's the world that we live in. Now, the first thing we want to talk about as we get into this is the idea of injustice. Because injustice is what I hear about going on all the time in the national news. It seems there's always some injustice that needs to be righted. There's always some wrong that needs to be corrected. And do you all get that? I mean, I get that. Have you ever been wronged by somebody in a way that makes you feel like you deserve to be righted for that wrong? I have. I mean, I'm just being honest with you. There have been times in my life when I think that I've been treated very badly, and because I've been treated very badly, I want to feel as if I've been righted. Will that video clip work, you think, Phil? Okay, so we had this really awesome video clip set up for today. We're not going to be able to play it due to some technical difficulties, but let me briefly illustrate what the video clip was about. When I was growing up, watching cartoons was a big deal because they only came on like a few hours a week. So there were these special events throughout the year, like Christmas and Easter and Halloween, in which there would be cartoons on TV, usually in a primetime slot. And one of the cartoons I remember from when I was a kid is a cartoon called It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. Okay, so most of you remember that? So the gist of the cartoon is that Linus and Lucy sit in a pumpkin patch all night, and Lucy gets cheated out of tricks or treats. So there's this scene as we get towards the end of the cartoon when Lucy just goes on this rant about how badly she's been treated. And at one point she grabs Linus by the shirt and she shakes him. You know, his head makes that weird sound in the Peanuts cartoons. And she says, "You owe me restitution." I was going to do it in my Lucy voice, but I didn't think that'd be appropriate. But so have you ever felt like that? You ever felt like you've been wronged and you need to be right, and then like Lucy, you just want to pick someone up, shake them till their head rattles around like marbles? If you've been there, then you understand what it means to be the victim of injustice. The question becomes then, how do we as believers deal with injustice? Because what I know is that there's going to be injustice in the world. The critical question becomes, how do I deal with the injustice? What I see going on in churches today, I'm not sure is the biblical approach to how we deal with injustice, because what I see going on in churches is that we are now dividing ourselves up along some particular political ideology about how we respond to injustice, and that ought not be in the church. You understand that? We ought not be divided in the church about how to deal with injustice. We ought to be united in how we deal with it. The problem is the biblical prescription for dealing with injustice. Let me tell you what, it is very hard to live out in your everyday life, and I think that's why we have trouble. Bow your heads with me as we get started then. Father, we thank you again for this morning that you've allowed us to come together. We thank you for the truth of your word this morning. And what we want, Father, is to really come to an understanding of what it means to respond to the injustice, not just around us, but that we see within our own lives. Help us to respond to that in a way that is biblically appropriate so that the way we respond will be an example to our world about how we really deal with the wrongs that have been dealt to us in life. Open our hearts to the reception of your word. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So, isn't really what we feel like we want when somebody's wronged us, isn't restitution really what we want? Or the idea that justice should be served? I mean, look, I consider myself as big a hillbilly as anybody in Pike County is. So I get the idea of justice, and I've said here before, I believe that when a crime is committed, there ought to be justice for that crime. Because I'm the kind of guy that believes you got to saddle up your boys, you got to draw the hard line. Anybody know that? Nobody knows that song? Okay, never mind. Y'all don't get my culturally relevant quotes anymore. So basically there's a country song that says that's what you do when there's no justice. You saddle up your boys, you get your posse together, and you go right the wrong. That's really not the right response. But that is kind of the redneck response that I grew up with in Southern Ohio. But that's not necessarily the right response. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start in the place where I believe most conflict actually starts. Does anybody want to take a guess where that would be? For me this morning, it's going to come right from a family, because I believe that is where most conflict that takes place in our life actually occurs. What we're going to see this morning is what I call a case of sibling rivalry. Two brothers who just go at it from two different ways. Or maybe we could say a brother and a sister. Or maybe we could say a husband and a wife. But I would suggest to you this morning that most of the conflict we deal with in our lives ultimately has its source inside or around us. And that's why dealing with the family is an important part of that. I remember years ago I was talking to somebody they were having some issues in their marriage and they wanted to meet. And one of the questions the guy asked me as we were talking about it, he said, "Do you and Rhonda ever argue about anything?" And I said, "Yes, but only the important stuff." And he's like, "Okay, well, what's the important stuff to argue about?" Because really what he's wanting to know is, well, what can I argue about and what can't I argue about? And he said, well, for me, the important stuff to argue about is stuff like when the trash is taken out and how it's done. Isn't that an important thing to argue about? Or, I'm telling you, the biggest one that Ron and I have had over the years has been how to dump the wood ashes and where to put them. See, that's important stuff that you should fight about, right? And so this is what I've learned. Most of the stuff that we argue about really is insignificant. We just blow it up into something it should never be. So what we want to do is come to some resolution this morning as a Christian. How do I deal with the fact that one of two people in the household does not know how to dump the wood ashes in the right place? And how do I do that without conflict in my relationship? So that's where we're going to start. So we're going to be in Genesis chapter 25. Now you can imagine this scenario. This is a love story of all love stories. If you know a guy by the name of Isaac from the Old Testament, Isaac was like 40 years old before he decided it was time to get married. And his mom and dad sent him back, I think, to their family to find a wife. And it was this moment that when Isaac saw Rebekah, he was immediately smitten by her. So funny. That's like twice that's happened over those couple of weeks. We really need to do something about Mary's cell phone, I think. Or maybe we need to do something about Mary and her cell phone. So over there, now I'm all flustered. I can't even remember where I was at. So in the course of this relationship, Isaac is just smitten by Rebekah, and he falls in love with her, and they get married, and their relationship is going great, and everything is going well. They've got the perfect, happy family, except it's not quite complete yet. So what Rebekah seems to want more than anything else is a son or a kid. Doesn't matter what it is. She just wants to have a child, and yet she's barren, so she can't have a child. So Isaac in Genesis 25, if you look at verse, hold on, I'll find it here. If you look at verse 21, it says, Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. So now the good news finally occurred. Rebekah's going to have a baby, and this is a big deal. I mean, this is a joyous event. Everybody now is excited for the coming of the baby, and yet as this is going on, Rebekah apparently knows that something is not quite right. Because verse 22 says, and the children struggled together within her. So this is a good indication of what kind of life these two boys are going to live. If they're fighting with each other in the womb, can you imagine what it's going to be like when they actually get outside of the womb? And now they've grown into young men. And so the conflict inside of her was apparently so troubling that she said, if it be so, why am I thus? Or if everything, literally translated in non-King James English, says, if everything's okay, why do I feel this going on inside of me? What's happening? And so she went to inquire of the Lord. And this is what the Lord says in verse 23 then. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 manners of people shall be separated from the womb. And the one person will be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. Well, let me just tell you right now, we've got crisis between these 2 boys, because it is not the normal understanding of how family units work in this day and age that the elder is going to serve the younger. Traditionally, what's going to happen is that the older brother is going to inherit the bulk of the father's estate. He essentially is going to be the one who's going to perpetuate the father's name. He's going to be the one who carries on the responsibility of being the older son. So traditionally what's going to happen is the older brother is going to get the lion's share, and he's going to be the man for all purposes. Not so in this case. The older is going to serve the younger. Well, let me just tell you, growing up with a brother, that is going to be problematic for everyone involved. Because the older brother is not going to want to serve the younger brother. And then knowing what the younger brother knows, that he's really going to be the one who's in charge, you know what the younger brother's going to do? He's going to do anything he can to be in charge. So you've got conflict within the relationship of these boys before they're even born. And Rebecca seems to understand that. God seems to understand that. And so let me just tell you, what we've created here is just a powder cake that's waiting to explode. And that's inevitably what's going to happen. So my guess is that the good news, at least for Rebecca in all of this, when she finds out, great, we're having a child. It's 2 children now. And it appears to be 2 boys. And the elder's going to serve the younger. There's going to be initially conflict. And so as these brothers grow up, if you want to look, let's see, I don't know if it's in this chapter. Yeah, verse 27 says, and the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. These boys could not have been cut from 2 different cloths. You get the idea. Esau, he's the older son. And that's merely a technicality. You understand that, right? I mean, it's merely a technicality that Esau came out first, but that's the way it worked. As a matter of fact, what we find out about the actual birth of the boys is that when Esau was born, he is described this way: red and hairy. Now, I will be the first person to freely admit, I don't think all babies are cute. Lexi, are all babies cute?
No.
Yes, see, that must be like some kind of family trait. Now, I know most of you see a baby picture and you're like, oh, that's so cute. I see a baby picture and I'm like, whoa, that's cute. I mean, different response, right? Because I say, whoa, because I'm like, whoa, what is that? And I'm like, cute. So, Rob and Brittany, I think you're going to have the most beautiful baby in the whole world, just so you know ahead of time. So you don't need to show me pictures when it's a newborn. I'm good with it. So this kid comes out and he is described as red and hairy. Is that really the description you want to give your newborn baby? Because I'm thinking, don't even say that, Kai. Kai's shaking his head like, yeah, I think that's good. No, that's bad. That's bad. Okay? He's red and he's hairy. And so they name him Esau, which, you know what it means? I think it could be red or hairy. I'm not sure which one. I know Edom means red or porridge or something like that. And I think Esau means red or hairy, or maybe it means both. Look, this is the only image I've got in my head when Esau was born. Does anybody remember Elmo from Sesame Street? Yeah, now you know what I'm thinking, right? So Esau is born looking more like Emo from Sesame Street than a normal kid. And so as Esau is born, he's red and he's hairy. And as he is being birthed, there's another baby in there. And so you know what this other baby does as Esau is leaving the womb? He grabs a hold of his heel like, no, you ain't beating me out of here. Okay, that's exactly the way 2 boys would be, wouldn't it? That's the way 2 brothers would be. You're not going to win this. You may be the firstborn. You may be the oldest, but you're not going to beat me. So as they are born, Esau is born first. Jacob comes out grabbing a hold of his heel. Now, they don't call him Jacob yet. What they see as the baby is being born is that he is a heel grabber. So they give him the name Jacob, which means what? Heel grabber. Because he's got a hold of someone's heel. Now, the name Jacob, we translated this, heel grabber. That's probably not the best translation of the word. The word really means supplanter. So what it means is that his name means you're going to replace. In this case, you're going to replace your older brother. So Jacob is born under the whole auspices of, he's a little sneaky. He's a little tricky. He's going to grab a hold. Anytime he can take advantage of his brother, that's what he's going to do. So anyways, two boys were born. They grew up, and they could not have been more different. Esau is a man of the field. He likes to hunt. He likes to kill things. He's always out in the woods. He's always out doing what in my mind, I think a boy would do. Now, Jacob, on the other hand, is different than that. Jacob, it's described as a plain man, and I don't think that's designed to be, anything disparaging about Jacob. I just think Jacob and Esau are different. One likes to be out doing stuff. The other one likes to be home doing stuff. It's just the differences in the boys. And I can tell you, growing up, I've got a younger brother. And, my younger brother and I are completely different. He's really smart. I'm the opposite of really smart. But I can work on stuff. He doesn't have to work on stuff. I like to hunt and fish and trap. He would have no idea how to hunt and fish and trap. We're different. Okay? So I get what's going on in this situation. Now, as different as what we are, we were always very competitive. And, I see it in my kids so much. Because, when I was growing up, we played board games. Board games could almost turn into a fist fight between us based on who's winning and who's not. Just so you know, I have a boy and a girl. I see the same thing going on at my house when Monopoly is played. We are close to melee because somebody's winning and somebody's losing. So I get it. Nonetheless, there's conflict that is taking place between these two boys, and this conflict is going to be a perpetual part of what they do. And so, opposite brothers probably not going to get along. And so there is one pivotal event that occurs, I believe, in the next chapter. Let me find it and look over here. I think if we go to the next chapter. Hold on. Oh, no, it occurs in this chapter. So here's one pivotal event in the life of these two boys. Esau had been out in the field. He'd been hunting. And when he came back, it says that he was famished. He was just ready to fall over from death, which, knowing Esau, is probably an exaggeration on his part, but that's the kind of guy he was. So he comes in and he says to Jacob, hey, give me some of that red porridge, for I am famished. And Jacob said, okay, I will give you some of my porridge, some of my red porridge. But this is what I want for my red porridge. You have to sell me your birthright. So you know what Esau says? What good is a birthright to me if I'm dead? I'll make your deal. I will sell you my birthright for some red porridge. Now, that's a bad deal, just so you know, because the birthright as the older son is your guarantee that you're getting the lion's share of the inheritance. So Esau cares so little about being the firstborn son. He cares so little about his responsibility as the older brother that he's willing to sell his birthright for a bowl of porridge. Now, that's the first event of a couple that occur in their lives that are going to create division. And we know from that point, the Bible tells us that Esau despised his right as the firstborn son. So event number one is problematic because Jacob really takes advantage of his brother. Because look, if your brother's hungry, do you really sell him something to eat? I don't think so. I've got a brother, and we may have argued and fought over the years, but I never would have said, okay, well, I'll let you eat if you pay me for it. So we've got a problem here that is just compounding multiple problems. And so as the boys grow up, I don't know that there's ever really any great relationship between the two. It seems to always be filled with problems. And so then after that, you all know the rest of the story, right? There's going to be this day in which Isaac is getting close to death, and he calls his boys in, or he calls, he says what we're going to do is we're going to divide up the inheritance now. I'm ready to bless both of you. He actually says to Esau, what I want you to do is I want you to go out in the field and I want you to give me some venison. Prepare the venison and bring it back to me. And when you bring it back to me, then I'm going to bless you. Because do you know who Isaac is intending on giving the birthright to? He intends on giving it to Esau. Well, Rebekah knows that. And Rebekah does what we often do in our own lives when things are not going our way. We concoct a plan to make it go our way. And that's exactly what Rebekah does. And I'm telling you, this plan to me, and I've come up with some dumb plans in my life, just so you know, this seems like the absolute most absurd plan that you could ever come up with. Because really, so this is her plan. Go kill a goat. We'll make it taste like deer. Now, I don't know how that works because I've eaten goat and I've eaten deer. And in my opinion, they taste nothing alike. But for some reason, and maybe Rebekah is just really good at cooking goat to make it taste like deer. I don't know, but that's her plan. And then, Jacob says, well, Esau's really hairy. I'm not very hairy. So what's going to happen when my dad says, it's not you, come over here, let me feel your hairy arms? So she says, well, what we're going to do is we're going to take the goat skin and we're going to cover you in goat skin and it'll be really hairy and furry and your dad won't know the difference. Now again, does that sound like a plan that even has any chance of success? I mean, I would like to think that I can tell that, Karen, your boys have raised goats, right? Can you tell the difference between goat hair and human hair?
I think so.
I would think so.
How hairy God would be.
Well, yeah, I guess if he really looks like Elmo, then maybe it's not that much of a stretch. I don't know.
But yes.
I'm thinking in my head, I don't know that if somebody walks up to me with a goat skin and says, hey, I shaved, see what it feels like, I'm going to say, no, that's not real. But Isaac's old, and his eyes aren't very good, so how's he going to know? So anyways, as this plan unfolds, it seems to have worked. Because as Jacob brings his goat meat in, and he takes it to Isaac, Isaac says, you know what? It sounds like Jacob, but it feels like Esau. Which again just perplexes me, but that's what happens. And so, as Jacob pulls off this, what I think is incredible deception for his father, does anybody remember what Esau decides to do about it? And I believe that is in the next chapter. So let me just go to Genesis 26 here. And we'll see if we can find that. Because that's an important thing. 27. Let me hit the next button here. So Genesis 27 is when this all goes down. And so as everything's coming to an end, Esau finally shows up. And so I'll read that part of it. Verse 32 says, and Isaac his father said unto him, who art thou? And he said, I'm your firstborn son Esau. And Isaac trembled very exceedingly and said, who? I don't know why he said who. Who? Where is he that hath taken venison and brought it to me? And I have eaten all before you came. And I have blessed him, yes, and he shall be blessed. When Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with a great and exceeding and bitter cry and said unto his father, bless me also, father. And he said, this is what Isaac says, your brother came with subtlety and has taken away your blessing. I don't know that that's really what you want to tell Esau, especially knowing how good he is with weapons. That's what he says. And so, Esau said unto his father, don't you have one more blessing, my father? Bless me even also. And also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And Isaac his father answered and said, this is what his blessing is. Now that you're the older brother, remember that is what your blessing is. Behold, your dwelling will be with the fatness of the earth and with the dew from heaven above. And by the sword you shall live and serve your brother. And it shall come to pass, when thou shalt have the dominion, thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. So Esau, I'm sorry, buddy, but your blessing is going to be, you get to serve your brother for a long time. That's the blessing. How do you think Esau is going to deal with that? Okay, this is what it says in verse 41. And Esau, this is the word that it uses, Esau hated Jacob. That's a strong word to hate your brother, but that's exactly what's going on. And so Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing, And this is what he says in his heart. This is what he's thinking. Now you get the mind of what's going on in Esau's brain. The days of mourning for my father are at hand. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. Man, that's a bitter dude right there. And that is a guy, do you think conflict is the right word to use that's going on in this relationship? I tell you what, there's some conflict here in a real way. And I'm guessing that if you could get into Esau's brain, what he's thinking to himself is, this is not fair. I'm the older brother. I deserve it. I earned the right. Somebody owes me restitution. And his name is Jacob. And so, that night, or that day, Esau made a vow that he was going to kill his brother. And so when Rebekah heard that, you know what Rebekah did? She decided it would be a good idea if she would send Jacob away for a while. I think that was a very smart move on her part, because if she doesn't send Jacob away, there's probably going to be a tragedy in the family. Now let me just say at this point, and I think this would be a good time to point this out, because I believe God is sovereign in all things. I believe God always has a plan to accomplish His purpose. I believe that's always the case. I also believe that we, sometimes in our zeal to see God's will be done, we impede the divine purpose of God for our own ends. And we ultimately subvert God's will to see it done our way. And we need to be careful about that, because I will suggest to you then that every time we do that, we create a source of conflict in our lives that we do not need. If we are willing to trust. Because look, do you believe that God had a plan to make sure Jacob was the brother who was the first blessed son of the father? I believe he had a plan. And I don't know that that plan involved lies and deception and murder. But that stuff all makes for a good story, doesn't it? It does. But that's not what we want. And so Jacob does the smart thing, and he decides that he's going to take a little trip. And he takes a little trip, and he spends 20 years with his father-in-law Laban. And you all know the story about Jacob and Laban. I believe Jacob served 7 years for his first wife, 7 years for his second wife, and then 6 years for all the livestock that he brought. And so they reached a point where the relationship between Jacob and Laban was really at a breaking point. There's going to be more conflict in Jacob's life, and he seems to have matured a little bit where he doesn't want that conflict to take place. So what he decides to do is just sneak out kind of when nobody is expecting it. And so one day, Jacob packs up his family and he sneaks off. And as he is on his way, he has another encounter with Laban, his father-in-law. So as he leaves, his father-in-law gets mad. He really gets mad because someone stole his idols. And so he overtakes Jacob and all his company. And this comes from chapter 31, Phil. This is in verses 36 through 42. And so as Laban overtakes Jacob, what he wants to do is find out, why did you leave without telling me and take my girls? Look, I get that. I'm a dad. You take my daughter and you don't tell me, there could be problems on the horizon. Okay? So I get that. And he also says, you stole my idols. And Jacob says, I haven't done any of that. You're bringing a false accusation against me. So whoever is in possession of the idols, well, they're going to be put to death. Well, does anybody know who happens to be in possession of the idols? Rachel is. And Rachel is the really favorite wife. But she pulls off a master deception. And I won't go into how she did that, but she just did. Okay? No, Bill, I'll let you talk about it in Sunday school class. And so after they don't find anything, verse 36 says, Then Jacob was angry and rebuked Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, What is my trespass? What is my sin that you have so hotly pursued me? Although you've searched all my things, what part of your household things have you found? Set it here before my brethren and your brethren, and that they may judge between us. These 20 years I've been with you, and look, I just see this as Jacob finally getting to tell his father-in-law off in a way that he's wanted to for a long time. And now he gets the opportunity. Not that I would ever do anything like that, though. So, I've been with you these 20 years, I think. Yeah, I've been with you these 20 years. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried their young, and I have not eaten the rams of your flock. That which was torn by beasts, I did not bring to you, I bore the loss of it. You required it from my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was in the day the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. Thus I have been in your house 20 years. I served you 14 for your 2 daughters and 6 for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. Now notice this next verse, 42. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac, had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hand and rebuked you last night. Now here's an important part of this change that's going on, this transformation that's occurring in Jacob's life. He's really not the deceiver anymore. He's not the kid who's holding on to his brother's heel. He's not the kind of guy who's going to deceive. He's not the guy who's going to just say whatever he has to say to get out of the situation. Jacob now is experiencing the hand of divine intervention, and he's allowing it to play out in his life. He acknowledges that had it not been for God's intervention the night before with Laban, that Jacob would be penniless and homeless, just looking for a way to survive. That's an important place for him to come to. So he acknowledges God's intervention in verse 32. And I believe this is going to inaugurate a series of events where God will supernaturally intervene in Jacob's life. I think essentially to say, hey Jacob, we're close. Don't mess it up this time. That's what I think the point of these interventions are. And so the first one occurs with his father-in-law, Laban. And so ultimately, what we find out is that Laban and Jacob actually come to what they call a treaty of peace, or peace treaty. And so the conflict between them two really comes to an end. And then what we find out in the very next chapter, the first verse of the next chapter says that as Jacob starts on his way, what he finds is a great company of angels that were before him. So the next chapter begins by Jacob seeing this company of angels that are leading the way, or he meets them on the way. And so again, I think that's just part of what God is doing in Jacob's life to let him know that he ultimately is in control. And that will finally culminate in what is another supernatural event on the eve of his meeting with his brother. Okay, and that is the next big event for these guys in their conflict, because now we've got this inevitable reunion between two brothers who are estranged. No communication. It's not like, the way it works in our world today. It's not like after 14 years, Jacob sent Esau a text and said, hey brother, I know it was bad blood between us. Just want you to know I got married twice. Didn't do anything like that. Didn't call him long distance and say, hey Esau, just want you to know I'm on my way home. I've got some gifts for you. I'd like to talk to you. Did none of that. There's been no communication as far as we know between these two boys. Yet Jacob has now set off and he's on his way home. And so this is what happens as Jacob comes to the eve of his meeting with his brother. First thing he does is he sends out messengers to his brother. What he asks for is grace. So he sends his messengers to Esau and says, my Lord, if I've found favor in your sight, let me come peaceably, or something like that. And so this is the message he gets from his servant. Surely we saw your brother Esau, and he's coming with 400 men. Is that really the news you want to hear? I mean, for me it's not. If I've been estranged from my brother, and my reunion with him, when his last words were, don't worry, when the days are done or mourning for Dad, I'm going to kill you. When I know those are his last words, and he's coming with 400 men, you know what I'm going to think? This could be it for me. Because this is what I've learned about the way we deal with injustices in our life. The more we leave it unresolved, does it get better? No, it gets worse, doesn't it? When you've got unresolved injustice in your life, when you stew on it, when you just sit and think about it, when you think about all the ways you were wronged and all the ways you could be righted, that does not put you in a good frame of mind. Puts you in a dangerous frame of mind, because then you think through all the things you should have done and could have done. You think through all the ways you're going to get restitution. And generally it ends badly. And so Jacob, understanding exactly what's going to happen, it says he was terrified in my translation. And so what he decides to do, and the first thing he does when he hears it is pray. And when you look at his prayer, you are going to notice a very different prayer than his encounter with God 20 years earlier. As a matter of fact, let me find that and read it. I think that is in chapter 33. 32:9. Thank you, Rebecca. No connection to the Rebecca we've been talking about this morning, by the way. 29. So Jacob is going to pray, and let me tell you, we're going to contrast this with what he had said previously when he was at Bethel. And so in verse 9, this is what it says. Let's see. Where was it? 32. Oh, I went to 29, 32. Today is not my day for reading very well, apparently. Or listening very well, for that matter. So this is his prayer. And so Jacob said, God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord which said to me, return unto your own country and to your own people, and I will deal well with you. Look at this. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which you have shown your servant. Now, does that sound like the same Jacob we knew 20 years ago, who was ready to do whatever he could to get his brother's birthright? Doesn't sound like the same guy. So he's very humbled in what's occurred in his life. Then he says in verse 11, deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. For I fear him, lest he will come and strike me and the mother with the children. And you said, I will surely do these good, and will make your seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered, for its multitude. And he lodged there that same night, and took of that which came to his hand as a present for his brother Esau. So let's think about the Jacob who prayed 20 years earlier, maybe close to the same spot, because I'm not sure geographically where he's at. I mean, I could look it up, but I don't really care that much. But I know it was on the night that Jacob ran away, he went to a place, I think it was called Luz back then, and he's had a vision of a stairway that reached up to the heaven, and he saw angels ascending and descending, and he heard a voice that basically said, Jacob, wherever you go, I'm going to be with you, and I'm not going to leave you until I've done that which I promised to do. And so Jacob makes a vow that night. And what he says is, essentially, hold on, let me find it here. Essentially, if you go with me, and if you bless me, if you give me food to eat and clothes to wear, and you bring me back safely to my land, then the Lord will be my God. Now that seems like a very arrogant kind of prayer to pray. Basically, God, if you do everything I think you should do for me, then I'll believe you and you'll be my God. That prayer is different from this prayer, because this prayer essentially says, Lord, I'm not worthy of all the blessings that you've poured out upon me. And so after he prays that, it says he took some of his own livestock and he put them kind of separated from everything else as a present that he's going to give his brother Esau. Then it says he divided his company into two groups. Then later he's going to divide it into still yet another group. And so he took the third group, or the third division. That was the gift for his brother Esau. And it says he sent them in multiple companies. So, he's got this group, and maybe one group's leading the donkeys, and one group's leading the goats, and one group's leading the rams. And so he gives them instructions, and he sends them out kind of in that order. And he says, when you meet my brother, this is what you're supposed to say. We are Jacob's servants, and it is a gift for my lord Esau, and he is behind us. Then Jacob did what is really, well, I guess I get it. Then he separated his family kind of from everybody else. And so this is what Jacob's thinking is in this whole event. If I send my servants ahead with some gifts, animals or whatever, so I send one group of servants, then I send another group of servants, and then I send a third group of servants, Esau's really mad at me. What I hope happens is that by the time he kills everybody in the path, when he finally gets to me and my family, he'll show us mercy. That's what he's thinking. That's why he did what he did. And then even within his family, he took his, because he technically had 2 wives, but he really had a couple extra. And so he kind of puts them in order of importance. Okay? And he lines them up. And you know who's at the very end of that line? Rachel and Joseph, I think. Okay? And then, you know who's in the very back of the line? He is, which is such a cowardly way to go. And so as he starts out, he finally sees his brother, and I can just imagine what this experience would have been like for him. He sees his brother on the horizon, and I'm guessing before he even saw Esau, he saw the cloud of dust, he heard the sounds of the footsteps. I mean, it just would have been a dramatic event. And something occurs within Jacob, because no longer is he the guy that's at the back of the pack, which is where he had been. Suddenly Jacob gets out in front of everybody, and when he finally gets to Esau, you know what his first thing is? He falls on the ground before his brother. Now in chapter 33, Jacob is going to use the word "my Lord" in reference to Esau 5 times. He's really not even saying "my brother," he's saying "my Lord." And what he means by that is, hey, Esau, I acknowledge you are greater than me. See, that's an important thing to understand as it relates to conflict and injustice. We don't get greatness in our culture. And if we do get greatness, it's in the context of LeBron James basketball greatness, or really good quarterback that plays. We get greatness in the context of Tom Brady football greatness. We get greatness from the perspective that I'm the man and nobody's better than me. That's how we understand greatness. But do you know, the Bible says that's not what it really means to be great. If you want to be great, you first got to be willing to serve everyone. If you want to be first, which is what our culture is all about, you first got to make yourself last. See, Jacob now gets what God is trying to do. He's going to be the greatest, but he's never going to be the greatest until he learns how to serve his brother. He's going to be the first chosen son, but he's never going to be the first chosen son until he learns that his brother takes priority over himself. And he gets that now. So when we look at the idea of injustice and how injustice affects me, I want you to think about it this way. It's not about how injustice affects you. It's how injustice affects the people around you. See, that's when you really learn to understand how to deal with injustice. It's not about you being wronged. It's about how you can reconcile with your brother. See, those are the words that Jesus would use. Jesus would never say, seek retribution on your own. Jesus would never say, your own restitution. Jesus would say, agree with your adversary quickly. Because that's what Jesus said. Jesus would not say, if you get sued, get the best attorney you can find. Jesus would say, if you get sued, give up more than they ask you to give. That is an attitude that does not exist in our culture today, nor does it exist in the church today. So let me tell you how we as believers deal with injustice on a biblical level. This is the verse I want you to remember. All 3 of these come from Romans 12, if you want to go there. Romans 12, Phil, it's going to be verses 21, 14, and 17. This is how we deal with injustice in our culture today. Don't be overcome by evil. Overcome evil with what? Good. That's how we deal with injustice. Don't be overcome by evil. Overcome evil with good. And we're going to do it this way. We're going to start actually with verse 14 as we talk about how we deal with injustice. Because everyone would agree there's been conflict between Jacob and Esau, and that conflict is a direct result of the injustices that they both felt they suffered. Jacob felt slighted because he wasn't the firstborn. Esau felt slighted because he got cheated out of being the firstborn. So, Romans 12:14, this is what it says. And this is how we deal with injustice when it comes into our lives. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Look, we as Christians are supposed to live radical in the world, are we not? We're supposed to live radical lives, different lives. Can anybody think of anything more radical than what it says in verse 14? Bless those who persecute you. Is that a natural reaction? Look, when someone has wronged you, deliberately and willfully, is it natural to say, you know what? even though you've wronged me, I want God to bless you. Is that natural? Because I can tell you, in the conflict in my life, I don't know that those are the words that come out of my mouth. I think it may be something more of the lines. These don't come out of my mouth. This is what I say in my heart like Esau did. Yeah, I remember what you did. And someday, you'll get paid back. Does that sound more normal for most of us? Oh, I remember what you did. And what we know is love, biblical love, always keeps a record of wrongs, right? No, it says the opposite of that. Love keeps no record of wrongdoings. And yet, don't say it out loud, how many of you in your relationships, maybe with your spouse, or with your kids, or with your friends, or with your coworkers, how many of you in those very personal relationships regularly keep a list of what's been done wrong? Most probably do. Because isn't it just easy to do that? I mean, is it easy to say, you know what, you wronged me, but I forgive you, and I'm going to do for you what Jesus did for me. I'm going to live my life as if you never wronged me. No, that's not easy to do. Well, let me just tell you, that's not easy to do for me. Maybe for some of you, you got this figured out, and please meet with me after service and help me figure it out. What I'm saying is that the source of conflict in our lives, whether it be injustice or anything that branches out from there, the source of conflict in our lives, according to the book of James, does not come from other people. It comes from the lust that exists inside of us. James says, where does war and fighting and quarreling come from? Does it not come from the lust inside your members that war against you? All conflict has its origin within us. Now see, we don't want to believe that, do we? Because it's so much easier to say, well, it's my wife's fault, or it's my kid's fault, or it's my co-worker's fault, or it's Tyler's fault, because I go to church with him, and we've got this whole list of people that we blame for the conflict in our lives, all the while knowing that conflict comes from within us. So the first way we deal with conflict, according to Paul, is we bless those who persecute us, we bless, and we do not curse. So do you know what the difference between a blessing and a curse is? So a blessing would be something along the lines of, you know, my prayer is that God prospers you in all you do. That's a blessing. A curse would be the opposite of that. We would think curse like, ooh, you made me so mad I just cussed you out. That's not a curse, and that's not cursing, at least in the New Testament context. A curse would be the opposite of a blessing. So the curse would be, Becky offended me, and she hurt my feelings so badly that what I say, not to Becky, but under my breath or in my heart or in my mind, what I say is, Lord, I hope you show her the error of her ways, and you pay her back for what she did. That's a curse. No, Becky, I would never say that about you. You know that, right? That is an example. Because I would never say that about Rebecca. Okay? But that's a curse. And so you may say, well, Brian, I mean, who in the world would ever say that? No, that's the problem. No one ever says that. That's what we think in the deepest reaches of our hearts, isn't it? That's what we think about. That's why conflict left unresolved turns into something that it never should be. Because we think about it and we dwell on it and we refuse to let it go because we'd rather curse than we would bless. So Paul says, bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Number 2, Romans 12:17 says, this is great. Repay no one evil for evil. Now look, isn't it just an understood concept in our culture that if you do wrong, you deserve to be wronged? I mean, isn't that the premise of justice in most of our lives? The premise of justice says, you wronged me, you deserve to be wronged. I deserve to have a little bit of justice for what's been done to me. And look, nowhere in the New Testament, especially when we get into the latter New Testament, do you ever see the church or the people of the church or the apostles in the early church? Never do you see them saying, you know what, church? You need to get together and exact your own form of justice. Never occurs. Didn't occur in the first century church. Didn't occur in the second or third century church. And those were churches that lived with persecution that is unimaginable to us today. They did not rebel against their culture, and they did not repay evil with evil. But I'm telling you, in some of our minds, at least in the modern American church, the idea that I should get to pay someone back for what they've done to me is very normal, but it's unbiblical. Never repay evil with evil. And so now you're thinking, Brian, I hear what you're saying. I think you officially are crazy. Because it is not possible for me to do that. I've tried, and I have a temper. Maybe you've got a temper, okay? Maybe you don't have a temper. Maybe you're one of those people, and I know people like this, they can control their temper. They can control it, and they can hide it. But that doesn't mean there's not stuff going on the inside. They may not verbalize it like other people do. They may not explode in anger and say, you're going to get yours. But deep down inside, it's still there. It doesn't go away. It just kind of stews there. And then someday it'll build up into something that it shouldn't be. And really, if you think about how you argue with people in your relationships, I said earlier, Ron and I argue over important stuff, like taking out the trash and where to dump the ashes from the wood stove. Isn't it the silly stuff that often erupts into the most volatile arguments in relationships? It's not the real core of the problem. It's something else that just happens to be on the surface. And the reason that occurs is because we've never dealt with really what's going on the inside. That is where we struggle. And so you're thinking, look, I get it. The Bible says I never repay evil for evil. I get that. I know that. I just don't know that I can do that. Brian, the Bible says that I'm not supposed to exact retribution. I'm supposed to bless those who curse me. I'm supposed to bless those who wrong me. I hear what you're saying. I know what you mean. But on the natural level of my life, I don't know that I can do that. I get that completely. Because I don't know that I can do that. At least perfectly. So if you're like, it's not practical for me. No, it is. So let's then finalize on what verse 19 says. And really, everything that verse 19 says. Because this is an important verse. So basically 19 says, Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Now, okay, so isn't this verse a little bit better than the other two? Because you do get a little bit of justice in there, right? I mean, if you can't pay him back, we know who can pay him back, right? I mean, if Becky's really wronged me and I'm offended by it, I love Becky and I would never do anything to hurt her. I would just maybe pray that God would do something to hurt her. And somehow, in our minds, that's the right way to execute vengeance. And I'm going to get justice. I'm just going to be willing to let God give me my justice. It's easier. Makes a little bit of sense. But is that really the idea conveyed behind the verse? And so when Paul says then, do not avenge yourselves, or do not seek your own vengeance. And really, when we say we want justice, it's really just revenge, right? I mean, there's a difference between justice and revenge. What it appears to me that we want as a culture, as I look at everything that's going on around the world, we're really not looking for justice. We're just looking for someone to pay. And that's different. That's revenge. And so what Paul says is, look, don't go avenge yourself. Don't go get your own vengeance. Don't try to find your own justice. King James says, but rather give place unto wrath. That phrase, give place unto wrath. You ever thought about what that means? I mean, I have long and hard. What does it mean to give place unto wrath? Because that's what Paul says we should do. We should never seek our own justice. We should give place unto wrath. Now, I guess if you're reading that, you could interpret it and say, well, means let wrath kind of run its own course. Well, that's not what it means. We would probably say, when it says give place to wrath, probably if I were to translate that, I would have translated it this way, although it would have been not a literal translation, but a paraphrase. I would have translated it as give God space to work. That's the way I would have translated it. That would have been a bad translation, but that's what it means. So when Paul says, don't go seek your own justice, give place to wrath, what he's saying is make room for God to work in your life. If you feel that you've been wrong, if you believe there's injustice in your life, then what you ought to do is you ought to step back from the situation and you ought to say, God, you are sovereign in all things. You know that I've been wrong. You know that I've been hurt. And what I want is justice. So I'm going to trust you to give me what I want. Now, what you'll find out, if that's where you're at, and you're consistently praying, and you're consistently reading God's Word, and you're consistently connected with other believers who are giving you good spiritual advice, what you're going to find out is that as you give God the space to work in your life, that sense of justice or revenge that you felt you so desperately needed will ultimately be replaced by grace. And you then will be able to do what you're thinking right now is not possible to do. And that is to bless and not curse, and that is to never repay evil with evil. See, there is a place in our spiritual lives as we mature where we should learn to love our enemies. I mean, Jesus told us very clearly that we're to love our enemies. We know we're supposed to do that. The natural part of Christian growth is to be growing into a place where you love your enemies. Now, if I were to make a mental list, do I have any enemies that I would say I love? Probably not yet. But someday I hope to be there. So let me tell you how we make this practical. It starts on a daily basis with the people around us. That's how this becomes practical. So when I get mad at someone at work or someone at home or whatever it may be, when I get mad and what I want to do is get angry and say, "You idiot, why did you do that?" Okay? What I need to do at that point is really begin to step back and say, "God, I'm angry, I'm frustrated at my wife or my daughter or my son or my friends or my brother," whatever it may be. You step back and say, "God, I'm just so angry right now. What I want is for something really cool to happen, so everybody would know that I'm getting payback." Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you space to work. If we would do that in our personal lives, that would radically change the way we see the world around us, because injustice is no longer about me getting my way. Ultimately, what it becomes is my ability to share the good news with the lost world. That's what it becomes, because it gives me the ability to live in a way that the conflict around me is mitigated by God's power in my life. And it's not something that I've got to use as a resource to get what I believe to be justice or vengeance in my life. See, that's the way we ought to live, but unfortunately we don't live that way. We live in a way that we as believers look and act exactly like the rest of the world. And what does the rest of the world do when they get mad? They just act out on it. And that's what we're doing today. And that's where we need to come to a point where we say, "No, I'm not like the world. I can get angry. I can overreact. But you know what I'm going to do? God, I'm going to give you the space to work in my life. Because what I know about you, at least according to 1 Peter 2:23, is when they hurled their insults at you, you did not retaliate. When you suffered, you made no threats. Instead," Peter says, "he entrusted himself to the one who judges justly." We do that. If we live that, if we can make one change this week where we're willing to step back and say, "God, I'm giving you the space to work in this situation, and I'm trusting you for victory." If we can do that, we can begin the process of reclaiming our world from the fallacy that exists today that there is no justice to be found. Because justice is what God specializes in. Everyone gets justice, even though they don't always deserve to have justice. That is essentially what our faith is about, isn't it? We who were enemies, we who were in conflict with God, have the opportunity at salvation when we never deserve to have an opportunity at salvation. That's what our faith is about, and that's the way we should live. Bow your heads with me. Father, as we close this service,